Where does temperament truly begin? A philosophical lecture on consciousness before birth, the womb, and the making of the human mind. Ladies and gentlemen, when we ask where human personality comes from, we tend to reach for answers that feel familiar, safe, and measurable. We speak of genetics. We speak of parenting styles. We speak of childhood trauma, attachment patterns, education, culture, and social conditioning. Modern psychology and neuroscience have built entire disciplines around these explanations, and rightly so. They have given us language, models, and data that allow us to better understand human behavior than at any other point in history. And yet, beneath all of this progress, one question quietly remains unresolved. Why does one child arrive in the world already vigilant, as if danger were written into their nervous system? Why does another enter life with an unusually strong will, a sense of mission, or an intensity that no environment alone seems to explain? Why do some children appear exquisitely sensitive to the emotions of others, while some seem armored from the very beginning? If personality were shaped only after birth, these differences would be easier to explain. But anyone who has observed infants closely knows this is not the case. Some children are not made sensitive. They arrive sensitive. Some are not taught vigilance. They recognize threat before language ever forms. This lecture begins precisely at that uncomfortable edge, the place where conventional explanations begin to thin, and where we must ask a more difficult question. What if temperament does not begin at birth? Beyond nature and nurture, a forgotten dimension. The familiar debate between nature and nurture assumes a shared starting line. Genes provide the blueprint. Environment modifies the outcome. But this framework quietly assumes something profound without examining it, that consciousness itself begins with the body. Ancient contemplative traditions never accepted this assumption, nor increasingly do certain branches of modern consciousness studies. Across cultures, Tibetan, Greek, Indian, and even early Western mystical philosophy, human existence is described not as a single event, but as a continuum, a flow of awareness that does not abruptly start at birth, nor abruptly end at death. In Tibetan Buddhism, this continuum is explored through the concept of the bardo, a transitional state between death and rebirth. The bardo is not imagined as a void or blank nothingness. It is described as a state in which consciousness is stripped of its usual defenses. Without a body, without social roles, without learned identities, the deepest patterns of the mind rise to the surface. Fear, desire, anger, compassion, wisdom, will, confusion. These are not learned traits in the bardo. They are revealed traits. The bardo, in this sense, is a psychological mirror, a space where the core tendencies of consciousness appear in their most concentrated form. This lecture does not ask you to accept this as religious doctrine. It asks you to consider it as a philosophical hypothesis, one that gains unexpected resonance when placed beside modern developmental science. What modern science quietly confirms. Contemporary psychology now recognizes that temperament is not created from scratch after birth. We know that during the prenatal period, the nervous system is already organizing itself. Stress hormones cross the placenta. Maternal emotional states influence fetal heart rate variability. Neural circuits related to threat detection, emotional regulation, and attention begin forming long before language or memory. The womb is not a neutral container. It is the first environment the human nervous system ever encounters. What science hesitates to address, however, is why different nervous systems respond so differently to similar prenatal conditions. Why does the same maternal stress produce heightened anxiety in one child, but determination and resilience in another? Why does emotional sensitivity emerge as empathy in one individual and as overwhelm in another? This lecture proposes a bridge. What if prenatal development is not the origin of temperament, but its second shaping? What if the womb is not where personality begins, but where it is translated, the meeting point, conscious pattern, and biological form. In this framework, the bardo represents a pattern of consciousness, and the womb represents a biological instrument. Temperament is not destiny. It is a directional tendency, a bias in how energy, attention, and emotion organize themselves. The fetus, then, is not merely assembling organs. It is tuning a nervous system to receive a pre-existing orientation of mind. Fear-oriented consciousness tends toward heightened sensory vigilance. Anger-oriented consciousness tends toward rapid mobilization and reactivity. Compassion-oriented consciousness tunes itself toward emotional resonance. Wisdom-oriented consciousness gravitates toward observation and internal coherence. These tendencies do not dictate character. They define sensitivity thresholds, and here lies the most critical insight of this lecture. The womb does not create temperament, but it profoundly reshapes it. The emotional climate of the womb. To the developing fetus, the mother's emotional state is not information. It is reality itself. The fetus does not interpret stress conceptually. It experiences it somatically as waves of chemistry, rhythm, and tension. When a fetus carrying a fear-based temperament encounters chronic maternal anxiety, the message it receives is simple and absolute. The world is dangerous. The nervous system adapts accordingly. Heightened alertness, faster stress responses, difficulty down-regulating arousal. But when that same fear-based temperament develops within emotional stability, the message changes. The world is manageable. Fear does not disappear, it becomes discernment. Sensitivity becomes intuition rather than paralysis. The same principle applies to every temperament. Anger can become aggression or leadership. Desire can become addiction or creativity. Compassion can become self-erasure or profound empathy. Wisdom can become withdrawal or insight. The difference is not the seed, it is the emotional soil. Who this lecture is for. This lecture is offered to three groups in particular. First, to parents who sense that their child's temperament cannot be explained by behavior, charts, or parenting manuals alone. To those who ask not, how do I fix my child? But, how do I understand them? Second, to adults seeking relief from self-blame. When we recognize that our tendencies are not personal failures, but inherited orientations of consciousness interacting with early environments, self-regulation replaces self-judgment. Third, to thinkers, those drawn to the integration of psychology, philosophy, and spirituality without reducing one to the other. This lecture does not oppose science and spirituality. It proposes that they have been describing the same human reality from different angles. The central message: temperament is not fate. It is a current, and currents can be redirected. The greatest gift a parent can offer is not control, optimization, or perfection, but emotional steadiness. In the womb, calm does not mean absence of difficulty. It means the presence of coherence. When coherence is present, fear becomes sensitivity. Anger becomes strength. Desire becomes imagination. Confusion becomes flexibility. In the lectures that follow, we will explore 7 core temperament patterns described in Tibetan Bardo psychology and examine how each interacts with prenatal development to shape the architecture of the human mind. And through that exploration, we will ask 3 questions together. Where did we come from? Why are we the way we are? And how, even now, can we change? Let us begin that inquiry not with belief, but with curiosity. Desire, anger, compassion, wisdom, will, and chaos. How the womb translates the soul's tendencies into a human mind. Let us continue our inquiry by stepping deeper into the most intimate phase of human existence. Life before language, before memory, before choice. In this stage, the developing human does not yet think, judge, or decide, but the human feels profoundly, continuously and without filter. To the fetus, the mother's inner world is not background noise. It is the totality of reality. Emotion is not observed. It is inhabited. And this is where the transformation of temperament truly occurs. The desire-based temperament, the soul that must hold on. In the Bardo state, desire-oriented consciousness is described not as greed, but as movement toward fullness. It is the impulse that says, there is something missing and it must be found. This soul remembers chasing light, attraction, sensation. Existence felt meaningful only when something was being reached for. Now imagine such a consciousness entering the womb. When the mother smiles, something extraordinary happens. When my mother laughs, the world suddenly becomes sweet. When she tastes something delicious, that sensation moves through me like a wave. In those moments, the world feels beautiful again, as if I have grasped the light I was chasing before. Neuroscientifically, this is the strengthening of pleasure and reward circuits. Emotionally, it is the first lesson of life. Joy exists. Satisfaction is possible. When maternal joy is stable, the desire-based temperament begins to organize itself creatively. The child learns to immerse deeply, to focus intensely, to create meaning through engagement. Desire becomes creative absorption. But something very different happens when food, pleasure, or stimulation becomes a tool for emotional regulation. I learned that emptiness is dangerous. That discomfort must be filled immediately. That silence is something to escape. In this environment, desire no longer seeks creation. It seeks relief. The nervous system becomes impulsive. Delay feels unbearable. Lack feels threatening. Thus, the same temperament diverges into two paths: creative immersion or compulsive craving. The difference is not the soul. It is the emotional model provided by the womb. The anger-based temperament, the soul carrying unfinished fire. Anger in the Bardo is not rage for its own sake. It is the residue of interruption. This soul remembers being cut off too soon, too abruptly. There was something that needed completion. Why was I stopped? Why was the process interrupted? I carry a pressure to finish what was left undone. This is not hatred. It is unresolved momentum. Now consider what happens when such a soul develops in a womb saturated with anger. My mother's anger feels like the explosion I remember. Sudden, loud, unpredictable. I tighten myself like armor. I am always ready to fight. The nervous system learns that existence requires defense. Anger becomes reflexive. Reactivity becomes identity. But when the same temperament meets warmth, her warmth feels like a soft light. For the first time, I experience a world that does not demand battle. Something remarkable occurs. Anger does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes decisiveness, protective strength, leadership energy. Thus, anger becomes either assertive leadership or explosive aggression. Again, the seed is the same. The environment determines its direction. The compassion-based temperament, the soul that cannot look away. In the Bardo, compassion-oriented consciousness is defined by attunement. This soul notices suffering instinctively. Pain radiates outward, and the soul moves toward it without calculation. I saw beings in pain, and I could not turn away. My existence felt meaningful only when I could ease another's suffering. In the womb, this sensitivity becomes extraordinary. I feel my mother's sadness before she knows it herself. Her tremor moves through me. I whisper inwardly, "Please don't cry. I am here." This is emotional resonance at its most primal. When maternal sadness is chronic, the fetus learns a dangerous lesson. I must carry what others cannot. Compassion becomes emotional over-identification. Boundaries dissolve before they ever form. But when maternal emotional stability is present, I learn that warmth exists without effort. That presence alone can soothe. Compassion matures into grounded empathy. Thus, compassion becomes either emotionally intelligent caregiving or chronic emotional self-sacrifice. The wisdom-based temperament. The observing soul. Wisdom-oriented consciousness in the bardo is not intellectual pride. It is pattern recognition. This soul watches. It tracks light and shadow, searching for coherence. When patterns emerge, chaos becomes calm. Understanding itself feels like peace. In the womb, this temperament turns inward. The fetus tracks rhythm, temperature, breath, tone. The world becomes data. Neurodevelopmentally, this aligns with strong prefrontal organization. Psychologically, it creates a deep need for predictability. When maternal emotional patterns are stable, the lesson is clear. The world is understandable. But when emotional extremes dominate, patterns collapse, prediction fails, meaning fragments. The result is cognitive fatigue, detachment, or difficulty sustaining attention. Wisdom becomes either deep insight or disengaged fragmentation. The will-based temperament, the soul with direction. Some consciousness enters the womb with momentum. I do not yet know my task, but I know I have one. I am moving toward something. This temperament thrives on rhythm. When daily life is regular, the nervous system aligns itself effortlessly. The rhythm becomes a road. I grow straight along it. But in chaotic environments, the path dissolves. I push forward, but the wind keeps shifting. Will becomes either sustained purpose or restless frustration. The chaos-based temperament, the soul still assembling. Chaos-based consciousness remembers multiplicity. Too much light, too much sound, everything at once. I was not lost, but unfinished. This temperament contains potential, but lacks center. When the womb provides stability, order slowly emerges. I learned that even chaos has rhythm, but under extreme stress, fragmentation deepens. Chaos becomes either creative flexibility or emotional dysregulation. The final integration. The fetus is not a blank slate. It is a translator. The bardo carries the soul's tendencies. The womb gives them shape. Temperament is neither destiny nor illusion. It is movement, and movement can change direction. The greatest gift a parent can offer is not perfection, but emotional steadiness. Calm does not erase temperament. It refines it. If this perspective has expanded your understanding of yourself or your child, and if you wish to continue exploring the intersection of psychology, philosophy, and consciousness, your subscription, your like, and your engagement help sustain this work. Thank you for walking this inquiry together.